I should have trusted my instincts the moment she placed the plate in front of me. The dining room shimmered under the golden chandelier, every detail of that evening crafted to look perfect. Almost staged polished silverware, crystal glasses, and the kind of porcelain plates that felt too delicate to touch. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She wore her usual mask of grace, but her eyes, sharp, unreadable, never strayed far from me. "This," she announced in that silky, commanding tone, "is a recipe I learned from a Michelin star chef. Something special, just for you." The words should have been an honor. A rare olive branch extended from a woman who had spent years making sure I felt like an outsider in her perfect, curated world. But instead of comfort, they sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I am 30 years old. A woman who has built her life on swallowing words and smoothing conflicts, the kind of wife who tries to keep peace, even when the war is burning just under the surface. Yet that night, staring at the glistening salad before me, I felt a different instinct rising. An instinct not of peace, but survival. The salad looked beautiful, almost too beautiful. Crisp romaine leaves gleamed under the chandelier's glow, sprinkled with almonds and pomegranate seeds, drizzled in dressing that glistened like liquid gold. But beneath the sweet tang lingered something sharp, chemical, almost metallic. My stomach twisted before I even lifted my fork. I forced a smile, pretending not to notice, pretending I wasn't sitting in the middle of yet another one of Eleanor's games. Across from me, my sister-in-law, Vivian, the golden child, forever. Her mother's pride was already halfway through her plate. She smiled with that practiced smugness that said, "Look at me, I am always better." "Try it," Eleanor coaxed, her voice indulgent as if she already knew how I would respond. I hesitated just long enough for my husband Daniel to glance at me, though only briefly. He was too absorbed in some business talk with his father to notice the silent war at the table. That was always the problem he never saw. He never wanted to. I twirled my fork slowly, lifting a portion toward my lips, my smile tight, my heart pounding. The scent hit me stronger, and every nerve in my body screamed, "Don't do it." Then, in the smallest flicker of a second, I made my move. I set my fork down, casually adjusted my napkin, and shifted my plate forward close enough that Vivian's attention slipped. With a subtle flick of my wrist, I slid my plate into her space, replacing hers with mine. A silent switch invisible beneath the chatter and clinking glasses. Vivian barely noticed. She was too busy gloating about her latest work achievement, basking in her father's praise. But Eleanor noticed. Oh, she noticed. Her eyes flickered just for a second too long before her face returned to its mask of warmth. I met her gaze and smiled, the same empty smile she had given me for years. And then I took a bite of the salad Vivian had been eating. Just as Vivian picked up the one meant for me, the storm began quietly. At first, only a faint shift in Vivian's posture, a furrow between her brows. She coughed lightly, waved it off, then coughed again, her voice tightening as she reached for her glass of water. I watched her hands tremble, watched the flash creep up her pale skin. Daniel finally looked up. "Vivian, are you okay?" She brushed him off with a too quick smile. "Just spice is too strong, maybe." But I heard the strain in her voice. Eleanor's fingers curled around her wine glass, her knuckles white against the crystal stem. She said nothing, not a word, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I should have felt guilt, but I didn't. Not even a little. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one losing. Eleanor had planned something for me, something vile and quiet meant to look like an accident. But instead it was her beloved daughter who bore the weight of it. Vivian's breaths grew shallow, uneven. She pushed back from the table, nearly toppling her chair before fleeing the room. The sound of her retching echoed down the hallway, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I lifted my glass of water, holding Eleanor's gaze as I took a slow sip. For the first time she looked rattled. "Delicious salad," I murmured sweetly. "You must share the recipe." Her mask didn't break, but I saw at the crack. That night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A battle line drawn in quiet glances and poisoned dressing. A silent war only we two women understood. And for the first time I knew this wasn't just about being accepted or tolerated, this was survival. The house descended into chaos after Vivian rushed from the table. Daniel leapt to his feet, calling for her, his voice booming through the marble halls. Servants scrambled, one of them hurrying toward the kitchen for water and towels. Her father followed with thunder in his steps, but Eleanor remained still at the head of the table, her fingers drumming softly against her wineglass, her eyes locked on me. I kept my face calm, serene, even though inside my chest, my heart slammed like a fist against a door. I had crossed a line, there was no undoing it now. Minutes later, Vivian returned, her skin-pale lips trembling, though she had forced her smile back into place. "Just something unsettled my stomach," she murmured. Her father hovered near her shoulder, concerned, but she waved him off. "I'll be fine." But I saw it, the humiliation burning in her eyes, the fury at being weakened in front of the family. And I saw something else too, the flicker of confusion. She didn't know what had happened. She didn't know the plate she ate from wasn't hers. Eleanor stood, then her chair sliding back without a sound. "Perhaps we should end dinner early," she said smoothly, though her gaze never left me. "It seems the evening has taken an unfortunate turn." The guests murmured in agreement, gathering their coats and purses, whispering speculations behind their hands. Daniel muttered apologies as he ushered them out while Vivian disappeared upstairs to recover. Soon only Eleanor and I remained in the silent dining room. She moved closer, her heels clicking softly on the floor, until she stood across the table from me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You think you're clever," she whispered, "but you have no idea what you've started." I smiled faintly, though my palms were damp against the linen napkin in my lap. Maybe it's time someone did. For a moment, we simply stared at one another, two women bound by a single secret. Then she turned away, her silhouette regal as she ascended the stairs. I heard the faintest creak of her door closing, and with it the weight of a silent war settling on my shoulders. That night, Daniel asked nothing. He was too worried about Vivian, too blind to see the current beneath the surface. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing. My mind replayed every second of the evening, every glance, every twitch of Eleanor's jaw. The truth settled over me like a shroud. She had intended to harm me. I had smelled it, tasted it, sensed it in my bones. That salad wasn't just bitter, it was dangerous. And for all her polished composure, Eleanor's silence when Vivian faltered told me everything I needed to know. Days passed and the tension grew thicker. Eleanor didn't speak of that night. She didn't accuse me, didn't acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she treated me with unnerving politeness, inviting me for tea, asking about my hobbies, even complimenting my dress. It was as if she had rewritten the night altogether, burying it beneath layers of civility. But her eyes betrayed her. Every glance lingered too long. Every smile curved a little too sharp. And I knew this was her game. Pretend nothing had happened. Pretend she wasn't plotting her next move. Vivian, meanwhile, grew colder toward me. She didn't suspect the truth, not fully, but she had always mirrored her mother's disdain. Now, humiliated and weakened, she looked at me with sharper edges, as if my very presence was an insult she couldn't tolerate. One evening, while Daniel was away on business, Eleanor appeared at my door with a covered tray. "I thought you might enjoy something sweet," she said, her voice as smooth as glass. She lifted the lid to reveal a slice of cake, delicate and frosted with intricate swirls. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. "That's very kind of you," I said softly. Her lips curved. "Go on, try it." The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken truth. I lifted the plate, my hand steady though my heart raced. And then deliberately I set it back down untouched. "I'll save it for later," I murmured. Her eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. But she only nodded, turned gracefully, and left me standing there with the cake untouched and the door trembling against its hinges. That night I threw it away. It was no longer a question of if she would strike again. It was a question of when. The weeks that followed blurred into a pattern of politeness and poison, though most of it was invisible to anyone but me. On the surface, Eleanor was the perfect hostess, the flawless matriarch. She planned luncheons, smiled through charity events, and praised Daniel to anyone who would listen. But beneath her charm I felt the trap tightening. Every gathering became a test. At dinner she'd pass me a dish with her manicured hands, insisting I try the first bite. At brunch she'd slide a teacup across the table, her eyes watching as I lifted it to my lips. Sometimes the food was perfectly fine, sometimes it carried that faint metallic tang again, just enough to make me wonder if my senses were betraying me. Daniel, oblivious, noticed only my hesitation. "You're always so cautious," he teased one night. "My mother's cooking isn't that bad." I forced a laugh, hiding the fear burning in my chest. How could I explain to him that the war between his mother and me had crossed into a place he couldn't begin to understand? Vivian grew sharper as well. She hovered at my side during meals, her eyes narrowing whenever I set my fork down too soon. She made offhand remarks, little jabs that cut deeper than she knew. Not everyone has the stomach for fine dining. Some of us were raised with stronger constitutions. It was clear she wanted revenge for her humiliation that night. But she didn't realize her own mother had lit the match. I started avoiding family meals whenever I could. I claimed headaches, errands, work, obligations, anything to sidestep another evening at that long mahogany table. Yet every time I skipped, Eleanor made sure to send something home with Daniel. A container of soup, a slice of pie, cookies neatly arranged on porcelain. Gifts I never touched. At night I dreamed of locked rooms and broken clocks, of rusted keys slipping from my hands. I woke in cold sweats, my pulse racing, convinced I had already consumed something deadly. But beneath the fear something harder began to form. Anger. For years I had bent myself to fit into their world. I had smiled at insults, swallowed bitterness, endured silence. But now Eleanor had made one mistake. She had shown me how far she was willing to go, and in doing so she had freed me from the illusion of peace. One evening while Daniel was away, I returned to the cottage where Holly, my late mother-in-law, before Eleanor, once kept her diaries. I needed clarity. I needed strength from someone who had lived under the same suffocating roof. I sat by the window reading old pages, her words whispering of loneliness, of betrayal, of small acts of resistance that kept her soul alive. "They feed you their poison slowly," she had written. "But if you learn to taste the difference between love and control, you'll never starve again." I closed the journal with trembling hands, a new resolve sparking in my chest. The next dinner I didn't avoid. I dressed in crimson silk, brighter than anything Eleanor would approve of, and I sat tall at the table. When she offered me a glass of wine, I lifted it without hesitation, but before sipping, I met her gaze and swapped glasses with Vivian, just as I had with the salad weeks ago. Vivian blinked, startled, but said nothing. She drank. Eleanor's smile froze. For the first time she knew I was no longer playing defense. The meal continued in silence, thick enough to choke on. Every clink of silverware sounded like a gunshot. My pulse thundered, but outwardly I remained calm, serene, almost amused. I wanted her to see that I wasn't afraid anymore. That night as I left the dining room, Eleanor's voice followed me like a shadow. "You've made your choice," she murmured, "and you will regret it." Her words echoed in my mind long after I closed our bedroom door. But beneath the dread, I felt something fierce, something unstoppable. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was fighting back. The night of the charity gala was when everything finally broke. Eleanor had insisted we attend, dressing the evening up as a display of family unity. "We must present ourselves properly," she had told Daniel with her usual icy composure. But I knew what she really meant. Appearances mattered more than truth, and she would rather choke on lies than let a crack show in her perfect facade. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and velvet drapery filled with whispers of wealth and ambition. Vivian sparkled at her mother's side, still pale but determined to outshine me. Daniel, ever blind, was charmed by it all, and me, I walked in with fire under my skin, knowing tonight would not end the way Eleanor expected. At dinner, the waiters presented course after course: filet mignon, roasted vegetables, wines worth more than my yearly salary before I married into this family. And then came dessert. A perfect mousse dusted with gold flakes placed directly in front of me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Would you like to try mine?" I asked sweetly, pushing the plate toward her. Her fork paused mid-air. Around us, the table continued to chatter politely, but her eyes locked on mine. For one searing moment, the mask slipped. A flash of recognition, a spark of fear. "Sassy." Then she smiled. "No, darling, it's all yours." I leaned closer, my voice low, almost a whisper. "You've tried this game before." Her smile froze. Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "What game?" she asked, her voice tight. I turned to her. My pulse steady now, my voice louder. The night you got sick, that salad wasn't meant for you. It was meant for me, and your mother knew it. Gasps rippled around the table. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Courtney, what are you talking about? I stood my chair scraping back against the marble floor. I smelled it. I knew something was wrong. So I switched plates with Vivian, and when she started choking when she ran from the room, I saw your mother's face. She didn't panic, she didn't move. She knew exactly what had happened. The room fell silent, every eye shifting to Eleanor. She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. She only folded her hands delicately, her voice calm as ice. You have quite the imagination. Vivian's lips trembled. Mother, is that true? Eleanor's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something that might have been regret. Or perhaps only calculation. Everything I've ever done was for this family, she said coldly. Daniel looked between us, his face pale, his voice shaking. My God. Mother. I could feel my chest tighten, not from fear, but from release. The truth was out now. The web of silence had finally snapped. Vivian pushed back from the table, tears filling her eyes. You let me eat it. You let me suffer so you could destroy her. Her voice broke. Your own daughter. Eleanor finally faltered, her hand tightening around the edge of the table. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked human, small, fragile, cornered. Joel. Daniel stood, his voice heavy. We're leaving. He reached for my hand, and though my legs trembled, I took it. Together we walked away from the glittering room, leaving Eleanor sitting alone in her kingdom of glass and lies. That night, silence filled our car. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. Finally, he whispered. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I stared out the window, my reflection fractured by city lights. Because you never would have believed me. The truth hung heavy between us. For the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He only drove his silence more powerful than any words. Back at the house, I slipped into bed and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Not victory, not triumph, just the quiet relief of knowing I was no longer alone in carrying the truth. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this wasn't the end. Eleanor wasn't finished, and neither was I. The fallout came faster than I ever imagined. Within days, whispers spread across the family's circle of friends, neighbors, and colleagues. At first it was subtle, a pause when Eleanor entered a room, a side glance exchanged between guests at her luncheons. But soon the whispers turned to questions. Why had Vivian fallen ill that night? Why had I accused her publicly at the gala, and why hadn't Eleanor denied it with the fury of an innocent woman? Daniel stayed quiet, which was louder than any defense he might have offered. Vivian, shaken and pale, avoided her mother altogether. For the first time in her life, she didn't rush to Eleanor's side. She didn't defend her. She stayed away. Eleanor tried to control the narrative, of course. She always did. She told anyone who would listen that I was hysterical, that I had imagined the whole thing. But the truth had already cracked through her mask. The more she insisted, the more desperate she looked. The more desperate she looked, the more people believed me. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, but triumph wasn't the feeling that came. It was something colder, something quieter. Vindication, yes, but tangled with grief, because it didn't have to be this way. She could have chosen love. She could have chosen kindness. Instead, she chose control. And in the end, control was the one thing she lost. Daniel and I moved out of the family estate. We bought a modest house across town, one with creaking floors and peeling paint. But it felt like freedom. For the first time, I could breathe without wondering if the tea set before me was laced with secrets. For the first time, I could eat a meal without fear. One evening, weeks later, I found Vivian on my doorstep. Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse. She held a small box in her hands. I found this in Mother's room, she whispered. I think it was meant for you. Inside was a diary, thin and bound in worn leather. Pages filled with Eleanor's looping script. At first I couldn't bring myself to read it. I didn't want her voice invading my peace again, but curiosity won. What I found wasn't confession. It wasn't apology. It was loneliness. Entry after entry of a woman who had built her life on appearances, only to realize too late that the people around her didn't love her, they feared her. She wrote of Vivian, of Daniel, of me. And somewhere in those pages I saw it, the twisted logic that had led her down this path. If I keep her weak, she'll never leave. If I keep her afraid, she'll never betray me. Reading those words didn't soften me, but it did make me understand. Eleanor's cruelty wasn't just malice, it was desperation. She was terrified of being forgotten. Irony, isn't it, that in trying to control us all, she carved her own exile? I closed the diary and set it aside. It wasn't my burden anymore, it wasn't my war. Now when I sit at my own kitchen table, the one Daniel and I picked out together, scratched and secondhand, but ours, I sometimes think of that night with the salad. I think of the rusted tang, the shimmer of almonds, the glint in Eleanor's eyes, and I remember the choice I made. To survive. To fight back. If you've ever felt cornered, silenced, or made small in someone else's house, I hope my story reminds you, you are not powerless. Sometimes the bravest act isn't to scream or to fight, it's to quietly, firmly refuse to be broken. Thank you for listening to my truth. If this story touched you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs strength. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and betrayal, and leave me a comment with your own experiences. I promise your voice matters.